Welcome to week 17, where we are motivated to give you all a good show this week, and we'll try to sort through which NFL teams will be encouraged to do the same. But before we get to all the motivation and all the narratives and all the position-by-position plays, let's start as we always do with Las Vegas. John, take us out to the desert. Tell us who's going to score a lot of points this week and who's not.
You got two home teams at the top of the list this week. The Detroit Lions. Jared Goff. Could he be chalk this week? We'll talk about that in just a moment. But the Detroit Lions, believe it or not, have the highest implied team total on the Vegas board for the main slate, 29 points. Just behind them, as you might expect, Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs playing host to the Denver Broncos, who gave up 50 plus to the Rams out of nowhere last week. I know Devin and I were both lamenting the Baker Mayfield show out. But the Denver Broncos fired the coach shortly thereafter. We'll see what they bring to the table against Kansas City. They're 12.5-point favorites. They've got an implied team total of almost 29 points. And as I said, Detroit is at 29 points. It's an interesting week holistically because we have a lot of games, 13 games, which is arguably the largest slate we've seen in the better part of 3 months. That said, the majority of those games are somewhere between 36 to 42 points. So there's not a whole lot to like. If you've got a kind of a diamond in the rough that you might like, there might be reason to go for it. The game that I haven't mentioned is the Vikings going up to Green Bay. I guess we should look at the weather there tonight and see what the weather is supposed to be like on Sunday, especially coming off of last week. But Minnesota's defense has been dreadful this year. And so maybe Aaron Rodgers becomes a play.
No.
He's only $6,000 this week. We'll talk about it. But aside from that, I think it's really going to come down to lineup construction, whether or not you believe that Detroit's Chicago game. I mean, this is a game that historically would be like a 38-point total, right? But this year it's 52. What do you fade that game? Do you go after it? We'll cover that. We'll cover all the games and even some playoff scenarios and how those might feed into your strategy for lineup building as well. So always very interesting in terms of how you approach the late year DFS GPPs, particularly as we hit this time of year.
Yeah, excuse me. Yeah, it's not looking like a lot of weather situations like we talked about last week on the show. That Green Bay game in particular is, single digits wind and 36 degrees. So
yeah, that's great.
A balmy winter day in Green Bay this week. So I wouldn't look at that in a lot of analysis unless, of course, something changes unforeseen. But everything I looked at earlier today suggested it's kind of the opposite of last week, where we had maybe like one or two games to even pick from last week. I think here we've got, kind of the whole slate wide open weather-wise. But this week, the analysis really centers not around weather like last week, but around motivation, right? We are recording on a Thursday night where a game is being played between a third-string quarterback that signed with Tennessee 2 weeks ago, and Derrick Henry is not playing, and then Tony Pollard is not playing for Dallas on the other side. And so will we have games this week that don't truly matter and that teams will kind of sit out? And our own Dan Hindery on Footballguys.com put out an awesome article, Week 17 motivation, that came out earlier this week. So it goes game by game, team by team. There's a chart at the bottom kind of showing what teams are playing for and who's not. For DFS purposes, Devin, why don't you walk us through some of the situations that maybe we should be worried about here for teams that might not play guys as much as usual or really that don't have anything to play for at all?
Yeah, there's really only two spots that I'm really worried about, and maybe we can talk about a third. But Jacksonville going to Houston, I think, is a weird one because normally we would just say, hey, start your running backs against Houston, but they are essentially it's a win and you get in game next week, regardless of, much like Tennessee this week. I think they could, if they win this game, they increase their odds from like 73% to like 75% getting into the playoffs. But it's basically like, hey, this game really doesn't matter. Next week is everything. So will they actually run Travis Etienne? He's going to play, but is he going to get 15, 18, 20 carries, or do they back off a little bit there? And then the other game to worry about just a little bit is Christian McCaffrey out in San Francisco. They are one game behind the 2 seed, so they're a 3 seed right now. They would have to get somewhat lucky to get the 3 or move up to the 2 seed. So will they go full out with Christian McCaffrey? The matchup is certainly good. He's a guy that we otherwise would be targeting. I think the way to approach it, that at least I'm approaching it, is we talked about 13 games on the slate. I don't know that you need to pay up for Christian McCaffrey this week. He's going to be, as of right now, he's the most popular player on this slate. I think in a GPP is an easy fade, but we can talk about that here coming up. So, and then there's a little bit on the Chargers. Like, they've been banged up all year. They're largely locked in from either a 6 seed or a 5 seed. I still think that's important to the team. You don't want to go in and just kind of mail it in for 2 straight weeks before the playoffs. So I think Austin Eckler will be fine and get his normal touches. But it's really, if I had to be worried and rank them in order, most worried about Etienne, then McCaffrey, and then not really that worried about Eckler, to be honest.
Yeah, excuse me. And we were talking before the show a little bit. I think the Chargers play to win, not only for morale and all the soft factors, right? But being the 7 seed in the AFC means you're facing Buffalo or Kansas City in the first round. Being the 6 seed means you're facing Kansas City or Cincinnati. I think being the 5 seed is probably the place that the Chargers would like to be, rather than the 6 or the 7. And so, you're going to have a little bit more favorable of a first round spot if you're that 5 seed rather than 6 or 7. All right, so let's move on to quarterbacks, guys. And nothing in the motivation analysis. You didn't hear any quarterbacks mentioned. I don't think anyone was entertaining Brock Purdy or Trevor Lawrence. Maybe John will tell us different when he leads us off here at quarterbacks. But John, kick us off here. Actually, let me go through a couple of news items here. Jalen Hurts warmed up or stretched or something today in Eagles practice. We don't think he's going to play, but keep an eye on that because Gardner Minshew projects really high once again in terms of value this week. Tua Tagovailoa is just probably not playing with the concussion protocol. And then obviously Derek Carr was benched. And so we have a $4,100 NFL starting quarterback this week, but he is playing San Francisco. So we're not going to go too crazy there, I don't think. And then Lamar Jackson still is not practicing with his knee, although he's not on the main slate, so I shouldn't have even mentioned him. So, John, talk to us about quarterbacks. You teased the Jared Goff thing. Is that where you're going?
Yeah, I think you have to.
Yeah.
It's
Devin says no.
I see Devin shaking his head, but I've only got one quarterback written down. Maybe it looks different over on FanDuel. I don't know, but on DraftKings, I think you put Jared Goff in and you forget it because he's going to be 65 to 75% owned in cash games. He's projected somewhere. I've got him at 20 and a half points, which is 4th highest on the slate behind Mahomes, Fields, and Herbert. And he is at least $1,500 cheaper than any of them. And so he is without question the best points per dollar buy on DraftKings this week. And he's going up against the Chicago defense that allowed 25 points last week to a quarterback, 39 the week before, 27 and a half to Mike White a few weeks ago. They're giving things up.
Well, hold on. The last 2 weeks they played Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts. So let's pump
Josh Allen
a little.
Josh Allen in 25-mile-per-hour wins also. We were worried about that game, weren't we?
But he had a rushing touchdown. He had a rushing touchdown and 41 yards rushing. So he got there, but
they gave up 300 to Mike White
6 times.
They gave up 300 to Mike White in a driving
I'm going to mention
rainstorm.
Mike White here in a second. So
Jared Goff has thrown for 300 yards in 3 of his past 4. I mean, their defense sets up their quarterback. It's 5,600. I'm not a Jared Goff believer in the sense that I don't think he's a great quarterback. But maybe I'm reading into this, Devin, but if it's the choices between Mike White and Jared Goff, give me Jared Goff.
Yeah, Devin's going to say Mike White, and I knew this while I was looking up numbers before the show. I knew he was going to do it, and he's going to do it again. So, Devin, tell us why Mike White.
I'm actually not. So,
okay,
shocker. I do like Mike White a lot in a GPP. The problem is in a cash game, Seattle's run defense has just been so poor that I don't know that I can get there. I am going back to Gardner Minshew this week at 5,500. I think that the Eagles still have, is the big question we don't know is Jared Goff actually going to be ready for the playoffs? And that's something that, they need to get.
You mean Jalen Hurts?
Correct. Is Jalen Hurts going to be ready for the playoffs? And we think he is, but the team certainly knows better than we do. They need to have Gardner Minshew ready to go as if he's the guy. And I think he's more than capable. We saw this against Dallas last week, 5,500. I just have I have a never play Jared Goff sign in my bedroom that I just can't get behind the guy. And he's going to be popular. And I think he's going to be, if you look at his more recent games, he did throw for 355 and 3 against Carolina. He threw for 330 and 3 against Minnesota. Both of those games are fantastic. But, you look at his game against Chicago earlier this year, they put up 31 points. He threw for 236 and 1 touchdown. I think that there's going to be a running back that I like in this game. And for Detroit that I'm likely going to be targeting. So I am going Gardner Minshew in cash over Jared Goff.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting with those guys being, I think, 100 apart, and then A.J. Brown and Amon-Ra St. Brown also being 100 apart. You can certainly make an argument over which, we haven't talked a lot this year, but we have in the past about cash plus stacks, right? With stacking normally being a GPP strategy, but you can certainly do it in cash games too. And those are two viable ones this week. It'll be interesting to see how they shake out. John, from a tournament perspective, are you going to talk Houston Texans here, or where are we going? Or should we wait for wide receivers till you give us your quarterback plays for GPPs?
Yeah, I mean, let's start with the obvious. Justin Fields against this Detroit defense looks tremendous, right? No team in the league has allowed more points to opposing quarterbacks in terms of fantasy production than the Detroit Lions. And, oh, by the way, you get Mr. Electric, Justin Fields for 7,900. I guess the downside of going with Justin Fields is his receivers are typically not ones you want to target. But I don't think you need a double stack here. I think you could go with Justin Fields and Cole Kmet, or one of the lesser receivers there. I'm okay with that. That said, I mentioned earlier I do like Aaron Rodgers this week. He's $6,000 against the Minnesota Vikings, and the Vikings have been awful. They've been awful on defense. Over the past 5 weeks, here's what they've allowed to opposing passers. 334, 182 to Matt Ryan, and we know about Matt Ryan. And then 330, 369, 382. They allowed basically 300 to two Cowboys passers, and then 300 to Josh Allen, 330 to Josh Allen. So effectively, take out Matt Ryan, they've allowed 300 plus yards to opposing quarterbacks in 5 of their last 6 games. And Aaron Rodgers is $6,000, and we know what he can do. I would not be surprised.
Do we? He hasn't thrown for 300 yards this year. He faced this team once before. He threw for 195 yards. He's faced Detroit twice and hasn't thrown for 300 yards. I just don't know that he's the same guy.
We're not talking about cash games here. We're talking about GPPs. He's $6,000. He's $400 to Mike freaking White, and you were just talking about Mike White.
Mike White has thrown for over 300 this year.
Which, by the way, Mike White's on my GPP list as well. but that's a different conversation. What's Rodgers? Where do you have him at in terms of ownership?
Give me a second.
I mean, John, the case with the matchup is excellent. I mean, like you said, you said throw out Matt Ryan and it's 6 of last 7. It's everybody except Matt Ryan in the last 7. I mean, this team gave up 325 to Kyler Murray, 329 to Teddy Bridgewater. Like, I mean, this is a really, really bad defense.
The beauty of it is, that offense on the other side can make it keep happening too. They can keep going back and forth.
Yeah. Having Justin Jefferson this year that has really helped him. I get it, but to Devin's point, also Rodgers just hasn't done it this year, so it might be missing his best deep threat here. We'll get the wide receiver injuries.
6%.
That's
Christian Watson.
And if you
Christian Watson didn't practice today, by the way,
Aaron Rodgers doesn't throw for 300 yards 6 times out of 100 against this squad, I mean, even in his current state, then
but that's not saying, like, what you're saying is he's going to reach value if he throws for 300, and that's just like factually false.
I mean,
if he throws for 300,
how about I change? 6%. I'll change the term. If Aaron Rodgers doesn't turn out to be highest points per dollar 6 out of 100 times on this slate, then we're just never going to agree. I think he does.
The thumb injury, is he motivated? Could he be pulled in the second quarter for Jordan Love? Like, who the hell knows? But we're just not. The guy I would rather have was $100 more is Tom Brady, going up against Carolina at 8% rostered. Brady is averaging over 300 yards passing at home this year, and better cast of weapons around him. J.C. Horn is out for Carolina, who's their best corner. When he went out, they got absolutely torn up by Detroit. I think Brady, if you look at a quarterback who could throw for that 350 and 3, is the guy this week in a must-win game that essentially determines the playoffs.
I won't argue with it. I think it's an okay play. I've got I think Chris Godwin's one of the better wide receiver GPP plays of the week. So I won't argue with you, except for the Aaron Rodgers thing. I'll argue with you.
I mean, my mind just doesn't work that way. I want to see somebody who I actually believe can do it. And could 6 times out of 100 happen? Sure. But could it be 3? Could it be 7? I think there's way beyond an 8% chance against Carolina that Brady could do this.
It's an interesting discussion. I mean, I hadn't thought of Brady either, and hearing how much, from the mainstream media, how much he's struggling this year, and then hearing he's averaging 300 at home this year, I actually had to go click on his name and check it out. Sure enough, he is averaging 300 passing yards, even though Mike Evans hasn't caught a ball, since Halloween.
Yeah, I mean, the narrative is Brady's been horrible this year, and he's thrown for 4,200 yards, and he's been a little rough on the road, but at home he's been, you look at it and he's thrown for over 300 in 3 games out of his 7. So it's good enough. And he's thrown for over 280 in 5 of those 7, something like that.
Yeah. It kind of goes to show how important winning is for Tom Brady, right? Because their team stinks this year and no one's counting his stats.
I mean, there's no quarterback, just to support Devin's call here. The optimals are calling out Tom Brady at about 8.5%. So 8.5% of the time he'll be in the winning lineup, and I think his ownership is going to be somewhere in the 3 to 4%. So he's a good play. I won't argue with it. Yeah.
So guys, I think a lot of people did well playing a $4,500 fill-in quarterback last week. How low would Jarrett Stidham have to be priced for you to play him in cash now?
No.
In cash?
Like free? Or I mean,
in cash, if there were more expensive options that I was like in love with, then I would consider him. But like the top end with McCaffrey's questions, Eckler has questions, Saquon Barkley has been like borderline awful lately. So like, do you have to go up to that $9,000 Derrick Henry versus Houston like we saw a couple weeks ago? That's when I would start entertaining a $4,100 quarterback, but not this week.
So it's as much the context of the slate than it is Stidham himself. And also, I mean, against San Fran, I'm not rushing to play a quarterback against them no matter what he costs. So
no, but the counter argument is they're not going to be able to run the ball either. So like, could they just dump it down to Josh Jacobs the entire game?
I mean, he's not.
John,
I don't even know how to.
Let's move on.
Devin's given a reason why Stidham could be in play, but not Aaron Rodgers, a future first ballot Hall of Famer at 1,900 more or whatever.
No, I'm saying he's not. If this was a week where we had those top end options, then Jarrett Stidham could be in play. But
yeah, I think it makes sense. And the only reason I ask, and normally Devin hates talking about players that aren't good at football, but he shows up reasonably high on our optimizer, and if you put a few high dollar guys in there and then press the complete lineup button, he started showing up for me at times, and I was like, do I really need to think about this? Anyway, so moving on, use the YouTube comments to tell us which geriatric quarterback you prefer, Devin's Aaron Rodgers or Devin's Tom Brady to John's Aaron Rodgers. Let's engage there and see what the people think. But guys, let's move on to running back. Few things here news-wise. Alvin Kamara, illness/quadriceps, did not practice today. So there's some rumors that maybe this is he and the Saints just souring on each other. Keep an eye on that. Antonio Gibson, Washington, did not practice today. And Brian Robinson has kind of taken over that backfield anyways. So is that worth thinking about? And then Aaron Jones was limited. He left that game last Sunday. So, will his knee and ankle injuries limit his workload? Will it be more of an A.J. Dillon game? I don't know if these things are factoring into your decisions at all, but that's the news. So, Devin, give us where you're going at running back here this week.
Do I just start this show on the rails and say Leonard Fournette in cash?
Oh, my God. No.
50, what? 5,600. He's caught 17 passes in the last 2 weeks.
But he sucks. Remember?
He does suck.
You don't play bad football players. Remember?
Well, let me just stop you. I mean, for 300 more, you could play Miles Sanders, right?
Miles Sanders doesn't catch passes is the problem. But if I'm looking at a running back who I like this week, he's got 9, 4, 6, and 6. And I talked about liking Brady at home. Atlanta's defense has been not great against running backs. I'm pulling it up now, but they've allowed 99 yards to Gus Edwards last week. J.K. Dobbins also had 60
Tampa
there.
Plays Carolina.
So,
yeah.
I'm an idiot.
You're thinking of James Conner.
I'm an idiot. But scratch everything I just said. We're not editing this. Just scratch everything I just said. All right, going on to the next guy that I have on my list. DeAndre Swift, 5,300. He is actually out-touching Jamal Williams or out-snapping Jamal Williams each of the last 2 weeks. So, Jamal Williams had his time in the sun. The Bears' run defense is as bad, if not worse, probably worse than their pass defense. Jack Sanborn is out for who was Roquan Smith's backup undrafted rookie. He's out, so now they have nobody at linebacker. They've nobody at defensive tackle defensive line because they traded Robert Quinn, and they've been dealing with some injuries there as well. So I think that DeAndre Swift has a good opportunity here to capture that backfield, and at 5,300, it's a fantastic price.
John, your thoughts on Swift and others?
Yeah, I mean, Swift is a player I've got marked primarily for GPPs, but I I think I can get behind it in cash. He's one of the better values on the slate. I've got him tied for 8th, but there's a pretty big or a pretty small differentiator between numbers 3 to 8, so to speak. So I'm okay with that. Number 1 on my board is Ramondre Stevenson, Miami, or against Miami, excuse me. He's 6,800. He's getting a slew of snaps. Last week, he had 91% of the Patriots' offensive snaps, trailing only Saquon Barkley, who had 92.5. So Stevenson is getting used quite often. He had last week remember the game script was negative. They were playing against Cincinnati and trailing for most of the way. But he had 13 carries and two receptions for 15 total. Again, negative game script. This week, I think they're 3-point home favorites against Miami. And I think you said at the top of the show, Ryan, they're missing their quarterback. Teddy Bridgewater will be under center. So this could be a situation where Stevenson gets fed in the second half. I think he'll be very chalky, probably trailing. He could be near the top in terms of cash game rosters, because as of now, the number 1 play, and I think this is going to change going into the weekend, the number 1 play, and this is where we should have led off with, Christian McCaffrey, as of Thursday night, at least in all the projections I've seen, is going to be the most popular running back heading into the weekend. But Devin talked about the playoff scenario there and whether or not he's actually going to play a full bevy of snaps. And the truth is he probably will not. And you can't afford to make a mistake with a $9,000 running back. So really monitor the situation, pay attention to the beat writers coming out of the Bay Area heading into the weekend. I think what's going to happen is you're going to see Christian McCaffrey become very not popular simply because of his price tag. So what that does is it'll default us down. Ramondre Stevenson is going to be a popular play. And I think the other guy that's kind of going to fill his gap is James Conner. Conner has been, the focal point of that offense since Colt McCoy's come online. Last week he had, against Tampa Bay, 15 carries for 80 yards and a touchdown, but he caught the ball 7 times. And since McCoy's come under center, he's caught the ball 6, 3, and 7 times. So he's a guy that I think on DraftKings makes a lot of sense from a cash game perspective, because he's likely to get you 18 to 20 touches, and some of those being high value with full points per reception. The player that I would like to throw out for discussion is Tyler Algier. In that same game, Devin, you're shaking your head. I don't know how I feel. He just comes out pretty high for me. I've got him at the 3rd best points per dollar ranking at 5,300. He's coming off of back-to-back games of 18 and 22 touches. And this week he goes up against an Arizona team that really doesn't have a whole lot to play for. But you're saying you wouldn't pay 5,300 for him?
No, I would prefer Brian Robinson at 5,200 going up against Cleveland. Antonio Gibson might not play. Robinson he had 22 carries last week, and Cleveland's defense has been worse than 22 carries and then 21 carries in 2 of his last 3 games. I think that Washington wins this game at home, and they win it through the running game. So Robinson's actually somebody that I'm actively targeting.
Yeah, those are all really good cases for guys in the 5Ks, which I guess speaks to why
I don't think Algier's a bad play. And
I don't either.
Like, I like this. I actually love this 5K range more than the top end. Like, if I look at the top end, I'm not playing Christian McCaffrey for the reasons that I've said. Austin Eckler at 8,500, I really don't want to touch either. Barkley, Jacobs with Stidham, no thanks. Nick Chubb with is Cleveland motivated in this game? Are they really going to give Chubb a full complement of snaps? Probably not. James Conner, I'm in on. I don't see how you're not. I think he's going to be the most popular guy. And then like I just keep scrolling past a lot of these names. I know you mentioned Stevenson, but Miami hasn't allowed a 100-yard rusher all season. They've been pretty good against the run. I would love, Travis Etienne, if they come out and say he's going to receive the full complement of snaps, he immediately jumps up to the number one guy on this slate, and I don't think it's particularly close going up against Houston. But I don't know that they're going to say that here recording on Thursday night. If Aaron Jones is out, A.J. Dillon shoots up to the top of the board. So I think there's a number of different scenarios here where we're 72 hours away from kickoff, and there's still a lot of questions that we don't have the answer to.
Yeah, I think you're sleeping on Barkley a little much. He had a rough go there for.
I've been sleeping on Barkley his entire career, so
I know you have. But so last 2 weeks, 32 carries, 171 yards, 2 touchdowns, 13 catches, 82 yards across the 2 games. And they need the game. Like there's no doubt about it. They need the game, and he's the guy. So if you are going up top, I may like Barkley even more than Connor, and I know that's probably going to be really unpopular, especially for $600 more. But I kind of think he's back a little, and it seems like a good spot there for him at the top end. I agree with you on McCaffrey and Eckler. I don't think you need to do it. So yeah, keep your eyes on the news, everybody. Unfortunately, we can't give you the Saturday and Sunday news here on Thursday night. John, anybody else that we're skipping over? You mentioned Kansas City as a high-scoring team against Denver. We saw what Cam Akers did to them. Are you going with one of the Cincy or KC guys in any formats?
We're talking now. We're on the GPP, right?
Sure. Any format. You tell me.
I think we've hit on the 3. In my eyes, there's 3 or 4 guys that are cash game viable. There's a lot of value this week at wide receiver, in my opinion. So I think you pick your 2 favorite running backs, then go over to wide receiver, and then build your lineup accordingly in the flex position. This could be a week I think you could justify going wide receiver and flex, which I typically do not do. That said, I don't think there's a lot to like at the running back position from a level of comfort. And if you're reading between the lines in terms of how we've approached this segment, I think you'll see that the others agree. For GPPs, I do have Travis Etienne against Houston. I guess I agree with Devin at some level that he becomes a cash game play if you get any comfort there, but I don't think you're going to. But to your question, Ryan, I do have Isiah Pacheco written down as a GPP play tonight. He's 5,600. He's a bit cheaper than Jarrett McKinnon. If you look at just the efficiency of both of those players over the past month, so over 4 weeks, McKinnon has touched the ball 49 times. He's scored on 6 of them. And Pacheco has touched the ball 63 times, so an extra 15%, and has only scored once. And, all things being equal, and maybe they're not. Maybe Jarrett McKinnon is just a superior athlete, but you got to think that those things equilibrate a little bit. And when I look at the ownership numbers on both of those players, Devin, for comparison, be ready. What I've got is Pacheco being somewhere on 3% of rosters, and Jarrett McKinnon being on, actually not that much more, about 3% of rosters. That said,
Pacheco at 5 and McKinnon at 3. People don't like playing Jarrett McKinnon.
Say again?
People do not like playing Jarrett McKinnon.
He did well for me last week, obviously. Big week for him. But for what it's worth, I've got Pacheco about 50% more likely to hit GPP value than McKinnon. So he becomes the superior play on a team that's a 12.5-point favorite. And, leading out to where you went, Ryan, Denver's defense, I could not believe last, whatever that was, Christmas Eve, how bad they were. It was because this is a team that's been good all year long, and they just looked like they were in a different world. So I'm okay with Pacheco. And then the last guy I've got written on my list is Zach Moss going up against the Giants. He's 5,400. They're using him pretty heavily now that, there's Jonathan Taylor's gone. He's a guy that right now is about 13% likely to hit GPP odds and probably on 4 or 5% of rosters. So he's kind of a pivot from some of the guys we've been talking about earlier that I think will become quite popular. The Tyler Algier, Brian Robinson guys. Those guys are going to get more popular. I don't think anybody's going to go with Zach Moss given what they're doing there in Indianapolis.
Yeah, that qualifies as a very unsexy play. Devin, anyone else we've left out here?
Throw Leonard Fournette as a GPP play. Why not?
Yeah, I mean, all the stuff you said about his receptions is true.
Yeah, just his matchup is not. So that's okay.
Not his matchup, It's weird because he is playing a lot more than Rachaad White, even though everyone, usually the young guy takes over late. But that's enough about Leonard Fournette. So let's move on to wide receivers. Before we do, please, a reminder here, subscribe, hit the bell, like our video. We do appreciate all of that engagement. Wide receivers, I mentioned it earlier. Christian Watson of Green Bay has a hip injury, left the game last Sunday. He did not practice today. So keep an eye on that. Maybe puts a little damper on John's Aaron Rodgers party. Brandon Cooks, personal reason, did not practice, but he's expected to play for Houston. And Tyler Lockett returned to a limited practice with that finger injury that kept him out last week. I forgot who started last section. So Devin, why don't you just start this section?
Do we just click Garrett Wilson's name and just move on to the next position?
Yep.
Yeah. When Mike White plays, you play Garrett Wilson. That's
when anyone besides Zach Wilson plays, you put Garrett Wilson into your lineup. Yeah, he's the first guy that I'm clicking on. Chris Godwin, I think, is the second guy. I think John might be in alignment there as well. I talked about Brady at home, and Godwin is significantly outproducing Mike Evans at the moment, and this is a must-win game for the Buccaneers. J.C. Horn is going to be out, which should only help that passing game as well. So that's two of the three. And the question is, okay, what do you want to do with your third one? And there's a path that you can get to with Justin Jefferson and cash. The question is, do you want to do that? And for me, I'm building my roster cheap at quarterback, taking two of those cheap running backs that we talked about, and then taking a James Conner at 7,200 for cash. So with Godwin and Wilson, I can get to Justin Jefferson. The problem is you're left with a tight end like a Tyler Conklin or somebody who you're not really all that comfortable with. So the question is, would you rather go up to maybe the question is, would you rather go up to a Travis Kelce this week and go with one of the very cheap wide receivers, or pay up for Justin Jefferson? I just don't. I might be crazy. I don't know that Justin Jefferson's production is sustainable. Outdoors in Green Bay, Green Bay has a good pass defense. The way to beat them is on the ground. Jefferson's incredible, don't get me wrong. And maybe it's just hey, his prop numbers are what are throwing me off. But his over-under is 95.5 this week. And that just melts my brain a little bit when I don't know what to do. John, help me here. He's a guy I never get right. So
you don't see Evan this dumbfounded often. Let me real quick, last 5 weeks, Justin Jefferson targets. Week 12, 11, insane. Week 13, 11, week 14, 15, week 15, 16, week 16, 16. So that's
they've been in good matchups, right? So the Giants, the Colts,
sure,
and the Lions have been the three best matchups in football. I look at the Jets and the Patriots, where he had 45 yards and a touchdown against the Jets. He torched the Patriots, and then he was awful against the Cowboys. So I look at it as he's either going to light this world up, and maybe because of that upside, you just say, hey, you know what? I'm taking him in cash, and if he does, I'm going to win, and I can figure everything else out. I don't know.
John?
I mean, the short answer is I'm not playing him in cash, but for different reasons. And those reasons basically distill down into projections. I've got him in terms of points per dollar, number 26 in wide receivers. I think a superior play and a guy who I have projected at basically almost identical is Amon-Ra St. Brown, 7,800. So he'll save you, what is that? $1,700. $1,700 that you can spend on your tight end and maybe upgrade there. In a game that is supposed to score 52 points, I want the best player on the field, and I think that's Amon-Ra. So that's where I would be going, by the way. I'm not going to sit here and poo-poo Justin Jefferson if you want to go there. But it's just, for me, it's value. And, and Devin, I know you're a big fan of Jair Alexander. He's probably going to see his fair share of him. So, maybe that's a reason to get away from him if you're trying to talk yourself out of him. That said, I like the Garrett Wilson call. I think Godwin is in play. Amon-Ra's top of my list. And then I've got three guys kind of at the lower end for cash. I'm still talking cash here. I think Brandon Cooks against Jacksonville. He's a guy that just every week seems to get his. I know Devin hated this call last week, but it paid off, and that was Drake London. 7 catches for 76 yards, 2 weeks in a row. And then on the low end, if you need a punt play, and I don't think you do this week, but I'll throw it out there for those folks who are building their lineups as such. Tutu Atwell comes off pretty high at 3,600. I'm projecting him somewhere around 10 points.
Why does he come off so high though?
He's getting looks, right? I got to pull it up to
he's got 2 for 14 last week and 1 for 10 the week before and 5 for 50 the week before. I know he's cheap, but
I don't know that I can support that one.
And again, John did say you don't need it, and I agree. You don't. Yeah. This is not a week.
Can we talk about Amon-Ra St. Brown real quick?
Yeah, go for it.
I know we're gonna go over on time, and apologies, we're gonna go over an hour. It's gonna happen.
Hey, it's our last show of the year.
It's the last show of the year. Give us a break. Amon-Ra St. Brown. He's gone over 100 yards 3 times in the last 9 weeks. They threw for 355 yards. I know he had 13 targets. He only had 76 yards on 7 receptions. He has 3 touchdowns in his last 10 or 11 games. I've been against him all year, and I know that we've been back and forth, and you've been right some weeks, and I've been right others, but I just don't know. I think he's overpriced, and maybe it comes down to our feelings about Jared Goff. But we saw Jared Goff throw for 355, which is what we're hoping for. But it's not a guarantee that Amon-Ra is going to go off if he has 355.
In the month of November, he had double-digit catches and 100 yards 3 out of 4 times. And then he went on a dry spell for the past 3 weeks, and you're saying he's not a good cash game player at 7,800.
But those are the only 3 times he's done it all season. So, did he just get really hot during those weeks?
He was hurt for a few weeks early in the year too.
Though. He was, but he's had 2 very good matchups in the last 3 weeks against Carolina and Minnesota, and he's 68 and 76 yards. I just don't know that at his current price. I think that's still baked. That November performance is still baked in.
So would you play Keenan Allen instead at 7,000?
I am playing Justin Jefferson. I am convinced. I want him. I am paying up for it, and I'll figure out the rest of my lineup afterwards.
And you did acknowledge earlier you always get him wrong. So
I do. I do.
How about I think we talked there were values earlier. Is there anybody below 5,500 Garrett Wilson that you guys need or want? Devin, you're playing Justin Jefferson, so kind of walk us through how you're doing that.
Yeah, so Godwin, Wilson, Jefferson, 2 of the 3 cheap running backs. I may even go 3. I don't know that you need James Conner, particularly if he's questionable and it turns into something. I'm punting at the tight end position, and I'm punting at defense.
Yeah, because if you did, and I know we're not allowed to give out full lineups here, but if you did Minshew, Swift, Robinson plus those receivers you talked about plus Connor, you only have like 5K left for tight end
I
and
understand.
defense. So like you're looking at like Noah Gray or according to our projections, like that. That's
yep. And maybe it's you can't afford Connor, but if that's the sacrifice you have to make, I think that there's enough running backs, and you could go Swift, Robinson, Algier, or you could go. I'm just looking through the 5K. I don't want to go back to running backs. Re-listen to the segment earlier.
Well, I mean, I think you could, you didn't like Stevenson, but you could go down.
If AJ Dillon pops because Aaron Jones is out, Miles Sanders isn't a bad play, even though I sort of said he doesn't catch passes, which he doesn't, but he's still a fine play.
Yeah.
So, I think that there's ways to do it, but if you talk about games in which could be shootouts, I am a big fan of Jair Alexander, but Justin Jefferson had 9 for 184 and 2 touchdowns last week or earlier this season week one against Green Bay.
Yeah.
And if he does that again and you don't have him in cash, you're probably going to lose.
Not many guys capable of it, and he's one of them. So there's that. Did we miss anything at receiver, John, GPP wise?
I think we need to talk about GPP.
Yeah, let's do that.
You want me to start?
Yeah, go.
Sure. I mean, what I'll say is there's a lot that I like this week at GPP. I feel like this is one of the top 3 weeks this year in terms of what I'm seeing as the field being off of likelihood to be in an optimal versus what I'm seeing for ownership. I don't know what's causing it, but I'm quite happy with it. So I've got quite a few players written down. Maybe I'll just hit some highlights. I won't give because I know we're running behind. Cortland Sutton against Kansas City at 5,500. That game script should be plus for them. It comes down to whether or not you trust Russell Wilson being able to find a quarterback, assuming Russ Wilson's quarterback, who knows anymore, but whoever's under center there in Denver to find receivers. But Cortland Sutton is going to be on nobody's radar because he's coming off of an injury that cost him 3 weeks. But he's been very consistent throughout the season. I talked about the Green Bay receivers earlier when I mentioned Aaron Rodgers. I think that you could take both of the Jets receivers, all 3 of them for what it's worth. Garrett Wilson is going to be very popular, but Elijah Moore, Corey Davis, and we're going to talk about tight ends in a bit. Tyler Conklin's right there. All of those guys are cheap, and you know that Devin likes Mike White. I like Mike White too, for what it's worth. So I think all of those guys are in play. And then DJ Chark against Chicago is 4,300. So these are all guys that I think you build your lineup in, and then you slot one of these guys in. And I think multiple of those individuals have the ability to score 2 touchdowns just because of their game script and their overall, I guess, aptitude.
Yep.
I prefer Chark and GPPs over Amon-Ra St. Brown for what it's worth.
Yeah.
Just based off of the roster percentage. We talked about Garrett Wilson, and when Mike White is the quarterback, you start him. When Carson Wentz is the quarterback, you start Curtis Samuel. And I think Carson Wentz is starting, right?
He is.
So, yeah, I mean, we saw earlier this year when Curtis Samuel was relevant. He's one of the guys, and I know you asked the question, who do I like that's below 5K? He's certainly popping for me. Both in cash and GPP is at 4,200. I think the price is pretty ridiculous. And then 4,400, apologies. And then I like Keenan Allen this week, 7K. I don't know if we talked about him or not, but in the slot, not having to go up against Jalen Ramsey, I think that this is a game in which he could catch 9, 10, 11 passes. Mike Williams is in a little bit more of a tricky matchup, so I think Allen is in a good spot. And then where I'm struggling, and I know we're way over time, but I don't care. Where I'm struggling is New Orleans. they're going to have to throw the entire game, likely. Last week, they were in awful weather. They have no Chris Olave, no Jarvis Landry. Is it Rashid Shaheed? Rashid Shaheed?
I don't know.
I'm glad you brought him up.
Who else are they going to throw it to? I mean, if they're behind early, which they haven't been recently, but he has 4 for 51 against Cleveland in an awful weather situation last week where neither team could throw the ball. The Saints threw the ball 15 times last week. The conditions are going to be much more improved. I think depending on his roster percentage and where it gets to, currently it is at
I got him at 5%.
5%. That's where I have him as well. 5%. I mean, for a cheap guy, sign me up. If you want to stack the Eagles and go Minshew, AJ Brown, I think running it back with Rashid Shaheed is perfectly fine. And Ryan is cringing because I didn't say Traquan Smith.
I don't think he even plays anymore, does he?
Yeah,
he does.
I'm cringing because normally, if either of us did 45 seconds on Rashid Shaheed, you would have shut us down mid-sentence. Yes. So the fact we even
remember what I said like 2 weeks ago. Whose show is it?
the fact that we even let you finish shows that we're better people than you.
That's been understood for 7 years.
It sure has. All right, let's move on to the tight ends as we continue to trudge through our final show here. Not trudge. I think it's 51 minutes in, but I feel like we're running pretty fast. Greg Dulcich, who's a projections darling in a really horrible results tight end, has a hamstring injury, didn't practice Thursday. Jonnu Smith didn't practice Thursday for New England, and Hunter Henry was limited. If one of those guys doesn't play, maybe the other's interesting. And then, the last one I had written down was Kylan Granson for Indy, and maybe Jelani Woods becomes a punt, but I don't know that anyone's going there. So let's go to John and talk about tight ends.
Yeah, I mean, this is a week where I'm likely punting for cash. Tyler Conklin's the guy that stands out to me. He's 2,900, and he gets an upgrade in quarterback. And he's been quite active on that offense of late. So he's the guy. But if you've got extra money to spend, let's say you go with Amon-Ra versus Justin Jefferson. You got an extra $1,700 to spend. That gets you up to 4,600. If you can find an extra 800 on top of that, I think TJ Hawkinson is in play at 5,400. But I don't think I'm going to do that. I think this is a position I typically like to punt. So Tyler Conklin, Evan Ingram, for what it's worth, comes out as a decent play as well. But I'm not spending up. I'm going to probably just punt it and spend money at a more reliable position.
Yeah, the pricing's weird this week at tight end. Like, it seems like there's a lot of guys in that 4 to 5 range instead of the 3 to 4 range. So, like, for me, Conklin is the guy in cash. I think you're just sacrificing too much. The difference between Evan Ingram and Tyler Conklin isn't that big of a deal, and $1,500 a price is pretty. I can find that elsewhere and apply it. It's almost the difference between Justin Jefferson and Amon-Ra St. Brown.
You're effectively betting on a touchdown, right? They're basically the same player. They're going to get 4 catches for 40 yards, and then you're betting on whether or not they get the touchdown. And I just don't see it worth the extra risk when there's only 2 or 3 points separating their teams in terms of implied team total.
Yeah.
Yeah. You guys mentioned Travis Kelce earlier. It's tough to do, but I mean, is there a world where you play Travis Kelce in cash and we use, Godwin Wilson and, somebody less than St. Brown, but somebody in that 6K or less range at receiver? I think
it's totally fine. I mean, the problem is he hasn't scored a touchdown in 4 weeks.
Yeah.
But when was the last time he went 5 games without a touchdown? I don't know that he's ever gone 5 games without a touchdown. So, is he going to get a touchdown at some point? Yeah, of course. And is he going to have a blowout, a monster game? Of course. So
he has one touchdown since he had 3 in week 11 at the Chargers.
2019 was his last 5-game stretch. So.
But he also has, wow, that was quick look up there. He also has 16 catches for, 218 across his last 2 games. So, certainly there's a lot of production. And last week, I think Mahomes only threw in the high 20s in terms of pass attempts. Is there anybody else mid-range you guys like? I mean, Devin, does David Njoku always seems interesting to me, but is the price tag just too high in the context?
No, I think he's fine in a GPP play because, I mean, you look at Cleveland and no one is going to want to play them because the narrative is that Deshaun Watson has been bad, and that's somewhat true. But they've also had horrible weather conditions the last 2 weeks against Baltimore and then against New Orleans. So with the weather being a little bit better against Washington, could we see Deshaun Watson throw for 250 to 300 yards? Like, it wouldn't surprise me. And David Njoku plays a big part of that. So I think that he's certainly fine. TJ Hawkinson is fine, albeit a little expensive.
Well, he should be after last week.
He should be, for sure. And then, like, this 3K range is just bad, to be honest. It's just not like, I would go Njoku or Hawkinson or Kelce or Conklin. Like, those are the 4 names on my list.
Yeah, I'm playing. If Jonnu Smith, if this concussion keeps him out, I'm playing Hunter Henry over Tyler Conklin for 100 more. Miami's sneaky terrible against tight ends. So 3rd most points allowed against tight ends this year. They gave up a touchdown to Mercedes Lewis last week. They gave up 2 to Buffalo tight ends, and one of them was not even Dawson Knox. So they've given up some big games to tight ends here. So I don't mind Henry there, especially if you're not playing Ramondre Stevenson. I'm not saying you want to get overextended on Patriots. John, anybody in GPPs that we're forgetting about here?
I mean, I think a player you got to be looking at in that 3K range is Noah Fant, right? For GPPs, Will Dissly was injured last week. Might be out for the rest of the year or is out for the rest of the year. So that means Noah Fant should get the bulk of the action there at the tight end position. This is a game that I'm trying to find it on the fly. Seattle's got a 21-point implied team total. I think you could do worse from a GPP perspective. The other player on my list, I'm curious to hear what you guys think. Dallas Goedert came back last week, played 94% of the snaps. He's $4,700. He does have a tough matchup on paper against the league's best tight end defense in the New Orleans Saints. But I pulled up who they've played against. Take away George Kittle in week 12, which was probably the week he came back from his injury. They really haven't played much in terms of tight ends all season. So that stat may be a bit skewed. What do you guys think about Dallas Goedert in this matchup?
Yeah, I like it. I mean, like you said, he came back and played, pretty much every snap. And even though I just cited tight end stats with Miami, if the defense first position against any position, the tight end ones tend to be the least telling, the least predictive, the most random, rather than against quarterbacks, running backs, receivers. So, I like the play. I mean, a tight end, if you're playing a tight end in a GPP, you want him to have 2 touchdown upside, and being an athlete is certainly a precursor to that. And Dallas Goedert is one.
There's just a lot of mouths to feed there. They threw the ball 40 times and he only had 3 targets. So depending on what his roster percentage gets to right now, it's fairly low. And if it stays that way, less than 5%, I think he's fine.
Yeah. And I mean, you're hoping in a tournament that he's the mouth that gets fed, right? And if he doesn't, then you're losing anyways. So
you hope the defense says, you know what, Devonta Smith, we saw what he did last week. We're going to shut him down and double him, and we'll take our chances with Dallas Goedert coming off of an injury. So if that happens, like, there's a scenario where, they go to Goedert quite frequently.
Yep. Let's move on to defenses, guys. And again, it's the position that seems to matter least. It's the hardest to predict. I think everybody's punting it this week. Devin, who are you punting it with?
New England.
Yeah.
At what, 2,600 against Miami?
Yep.
Yeah. Although, hold on.
Yeah. The 49ers.
No, I'm wrong. The 49ers are the play.
Yeah.
49ers at 2,900 is a ridiculous price. I don't know why. I had the Patriots because they were in an optimal. I will find the extra $300 to go with the San Francisco 49ers. It's probably the only week all year that I've said I'm going to spend up, but it's a ridiculous price.
And it's a good defense too, right? Like it's a legit defense that just didn't know. I mean, DraftKings algorithm didn't know Jarrett Stidham was going to be the quarterback for the Raiders this week. It's the 49ers. You fill that in early, and then because they'll be in 70% of rosters, if not more, unless something crazy happens going into the weekend, and then build your lineup around that. For GPPs, I do like the Patriots 2,600, particularly if ownership on the Niners gets pretty high, and I suspect that it will. I wouldn't be surprised to see that go above 20%. And anytime that happens, it's a clear fade in tournaments. And then the other one with those two cheap, and it's not just them, right? Like I think the Packers, at least in my model, are coming out as being decent GPP plays at 2,300. Even the Saints, believe it or not, they've got a good defense. They just have a bad matchup. At 2,200, they don't need to do a whole lot against the Eagles to pay their value. That said, paying up to be contrarian this week, particularly the top 5 to 8 defenses, looking at my model, none of them are going to be above 5%. So that makes them all attractive from a tournament perspective. And the one that stands out to me are the Chiefs against Denver. Denver just looked so bad last week. And we know that they've got kind of a lame duck coach at the moment and a lot of questions going into the offseason. And they're playing at home. The Chiefs, you could do worse at 3,800.
I mean, the Chargers at 3,700. I still don't believe in Baker Mayfield.
I like that too.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the guy we saw playing against Denver.
We've seen 4 years of sample size, and he has one good game, and I think that they're in a good spot.
All right. Let me go back and recap each position here, guys, before we get to some final thoughts. So
good luck, because it was a bit of a scatterbrained episode. Yeah,
I'll do my best. And I was trying to listen more than type. And I'm not sure I did either super well. So hopefully we get there. But this is also a lesson that if you're listening to the show and you really want to hear the picks, you might have to rewind and listen again. We're worried about motivation spots for San Francisco and Jacksonville, namely Christian McCaffrey and Travis Etienne. So keep your eyes on that. Cash wise, it seems like the build is somebody in the mid 500s. John preferred Jared Goff. Devin preferred Gardner Minshew. I prefer Jared Goff for whatever that's worth. GPPs, John says Justin Fields on the other side of Detroit, Chicago, and Aaron Rodgers versus Minnesota. And then Devin liked Tom Brady versus Carolina rather than Aaron Rodgers, and actually, vehemently disagreed with the Aaron Rodgers call. So moving on to running backs, John said Ramondre Stevenson versus Miami, James Conner at Atlanta. That was unanimous with Devin as well, the James Conner one at least. And then Devin likes DeAndre Swift in cash. John says more GPP. Devin likes Brian Robinson as well versus Cleveland, so another cheap running back. I think that's particularly if Antonio Gibson is out. And then if you hear reports that Travis Etienne is going to play all the snaps, he becomes number one. And if Aaron Jones doesn't play, A.J. Dillon's value obviously shoots up as well there. And then GPP-wise, John said Etienne just because people may be off of him. And then Isiah Pacheco of Kansas City versus Denver, and Zach Moss as a pivot off of Swift and Robinson, who are sure to be more popular due to their offenses. Receiver, John says do not play Justin Jefferson. Devin says do, and then John says play Amon-Ra St. Brown. Devin says don't. So do with that what you will, folks. And John also said Tutu Atwell for a punt, though we don't need to get there. And other guys mentioned unanimously were Garrett Wilson at Seattle, Chris Godwin versus Carolina. And Devin made a really nice point on Curtis Samuel, whose splits with Carson Wentz are significantly better than without. Also mentioned Keenan Allen and did a minute on Rashid Shaheed, as you may recall from a few minutes ago. Tight end was pretty cut and dry. Tyler Conklin was unanimous. And then John mentioned Noah Fant for GPPs, particularly with the Will Dissly injury. Defense, San Francisco is mispriced. Play them. Any other thoughts, guys, before we close for the week and for the season? John, we'll come to you.
No, nothing further.
Okay.
John's ready to get out of here. The only thing I'll say is keep an eye on. It was a bit of a scattered show, and there's a lot of news flying around and a lot of what ifs. Keep an eye on Twitter or beat writers or whatever your local news source is, because one coaching comment this week from a Doug Peterson in Jacksonville could change everything. Or if a team says, hey, we're going to shut players down or make even allusions to that, it could drastically change a lot of DFS lineups this week.
Yeah, agree. So, just follow your news. Certainly we love that everybody listens to us on a Thursday night, but in full disclosure, it's Thursday night. So, if you see some news and you wonder if that's going to change our opinion or change yours, feel free to reach out. A couple Twitter handles on the screen. YouTube comments also work as well. And so, and check out footballguys.com for sure for all the latest and greatest articles. Obviously, there's going to be a lot written between now and when the Sunday slate kicks off. So, guys, I always say good, thanks to the viewers, and certainly they're worth thanking here. But I want to thank you two for another year of fun with this being our last show. We've had some great calls throughout the season. We've had some bad calls, but that's part of what we do. And Devin, you stepped up during a hurricane week and did a solo show at one point this week. I think we had a 2-man show at one point. We had Phil work in for a lot of different 3-man shows. So it's been a heck of a good year. And I appreciate the analysis and all the work you guys do, for this show every week. So it's always a great hour and change of my life every week. So want to say thanks to you guys. And on behalf of Devin and John, I want to say thanks to the listeners, the viewers. I'm Ryan Hester. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for being a football guy.